All right. Hello, everybody. I'm making this video to walk everybody through your first app. I hope that by the end of this video, you all will be able to have your fully functional, your very own, your very first app up and running. So let's get right into it. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So today, we'll be learning how to do the backend of the app that we did in our last session of app development, which was week 2. Now, before getting into the backend, I want to address a few questions that many of you asked me during this session. Now, one of the questions that you guys asked me was how to move these elements. How do I move these elements in the screen, right? So one way to do that would be just click on the screen element and align center, and this will just align all the elements in the center. However, what if I want to align one element, meaning say this title element up here and the text box and start the game element down here in the center? What do I do for that? Well, one potential way to do that would be just go to the components and search for 2 different components. First is the vertical arrangement. Now, what is a vertical arrangement? Think of it as a container, right? Everything which is going to be stored in vertical arrangement is going to be arranged in a vertical pattern, right? Meaning standing lines. So one after the other after the other. So it's going to be a vertical pattern. However, if it was a horizontal arrangement, so there's also a horizontal arrangement, it's literally the opposite of vertical arrangement, meaning everything which is going to be placed inside the horizontal arrangement container is going to be arranged in a horizontal pattern. Now, so let me quickly pull these elements. So vertical arrangement, let me put it here. Before pulling the vertical arrangement though, let me delete this really quick here. So delete. Now, before putting the vertical arrangement, let me make sure that I have my alignments already in the and in the top left corner. Let me explain you later why do I do that. So I'm going to align all the elements in the top left, which is the default position. Now I take my vertical arrangement, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my start game and my text box inside this vertical arrangement container, right? And I'm going to take another container and going to call it horizontal arrangement. And I'm going to put it above the vertical arrangement. And I'm going to move this text box, which is the label, which is called by the odds, which is essentially the name of the game in the horizontal arrangement. Now, as you can see, if you see it here in the component tree, let's quickly understand what does this means, right? So screen is the parent container, right? It's the big container in which we have 2 containers, horizontal arrangement. So as you can see, if I minimize this, I have 2 containers, horizontal arrangement and vertical arrangement. In horizontal arrangement, I have a label which is called defy the odds. And as you can see, I choose to name my components very, very relevant so that by looking at a label, I can know that, okay, what is the purpose of this label? And in the vertical arrangement, I have TXT player name 2 and BDN start game 2. Now I copy pasted these buttons, so maybe that is why there is a 2 there. So let's just quickly change it, just call it BDN start game and TXT player name 2. Now this is not required. It's not going to change the functionality of your code, but if you do it, it's easier because then what happens is as a developer, you know that, okay, this is for start. This button is for starting the game, or this text box. This is the text box, and it is for taking the player name as an input, right? So it's relevant and it's critical to name to give relevant names to our components, right? All right. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and use the rename button right here. You'll see a rename button. Just click on it, and when you click rename, you'll see the old name is this, which you cannot change, uh, but you can change the new name. Change the new name to whatever you want to. So, for example, your current name is Label One. Maybe change it to game label or something like that, so that you know that this label is for displaying the name of the game. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this horizontal arrangement, and I'm going to adjust the width of this horizontal arrangement to fit parent, meaning I want the container to expand to the parent, and the parent of the horizontal arrangement is the screen, right here. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to align all the elements in the horizontal arrangement in the center. So I'm aligning all the arrangement, all the elements in the horizontal arrangement in the center, right? So there's only one element, so by the odds, it came to the center, looks about right. Now, doing the same, I'm going to do the same with the vertical arrangement, but for this, I'm not only filling the width of the vertical arrangement to the screen, but I'm also going to be adjusting the height to fill parent. So what happens is the whole vertical arrangement is spread to the screen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to align center and align horizontal to center, align vertical to center. So now now it looks like they're in the right position. So I have my name up top and other elements in the center. Now, as you can see, these are opaque, right? They have they're blurring out the background because they have their own background. We don't want that. We want them to have transparent background. So again, go to each element. There's a background color option. Change it to none. Background color option of vertical arrangement. Change it to none. And you have your objective achieved. You have your label up top and your text box and start game button there. Now, a second question that I got was, how will the player know uh, that that this text box is meant to enter my name, right? If I'm the user, I'm using this app, how will I know by looking at this text box that I'm supposed to enter my name in this text box? So in order to do that, you will scroll down here and use the hint property. So come here to click on the text box, go to the properties tab and click on the hint property now and enter the message that you want to give to the user to prompt the input, right? The prompt message should be, for example, in this case, enter the player name, right? So now you cannot see this message down in this view here, but when you run the app, you will see a light gray colored text, which is almost like a disabled text on the text box. And when you click on it, that text disappears and you can type your name. So that's a good way to do it. One other way could be to do a label. So you can do a second label up top here and say, enter your name. And that will tell the user that they're supposed to enter their name there. All right. Now that we have the sign for screen one sorted up, let me quickly go to screen two and show you what it looks like for me. So I have, this is the component hierarchy of screen two. I have the label welcome, which will display the name of the user as soon as the screen pops up. We already did the code for this, but I'm going to quickly walk you over through the code if you haven't done so already. Now I have a canvas and I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 enemy called enemy 1, enemy 2, enemy 3. And I have a pirate, right? So my goal in this game is to, the goal of this game is to make the pirate win and defeat all the enemies. This reset button is to reset the game, what it means to start the game over. And there's a clock. Now I haven't taught you about clock, so let me quickly delete this actually. Let me quickly delete this here and let me see if I have any code. I'm gonna delete this code here. So let's start over here. Okay. All right. So coming back, I'm going to show you how to use clock. So first of all, let's understand how to drag the clock component. So just take this clock component and drag it here down here. Now, as you see, as soon as I drag the component, it didn't appear anywhere on the screen, but it's down here in the non-visible component, meaning this is just a functional component, which is meant for us as developers. The user doesn't have to see it. Now let's understand what's the purpose of this clock. Now I use this component clock to change the positions of the enemies, meaning I want the enemies to change positions after every certain time interval. Say that time interval is 2 seconds. So I want after every 2 seconds, I want, say, this enemy moves here, this moves here, this moves there, this moves here. So I want to provide a random position to each enemy after the clock ticks, right? Just to make the game a little more interesting. Now, there can be different applications for clock. So the basic idea of the clock is to trigger something after every X time interval. If to say that X is 2 seconds, so do something after every 2 seconds. So say Reed, for example, is building an app to play funny sounds, right? So what he could do is he can set a clock component, and he can set the clock to, say, 5 seconds. So after every 5 seconds, the clock plays an annoying sound. It's one application. Let me know what you think about clock component and what potential applications can you come up with. Now, going to just have a position here for every enemy and part. And I'm going to center align this button. I'm just going to say align center, and that brings out. Okay. Now, let's quickly walk over the code for moving the username from the text box to this label LBL welcome. So what I want to do is as soon as the user clicks the start game button, I want the screen 2 to pop. And as soon as the screen 2 pops, I want for the screen 2 to contain the name of the label, right? So, sorry, the name of the user, right? So I'm going to go to screen 2, screen 1, and I'm going to go to the blocks. Now, remember, we use this blocks button to go to the code and designer button to come back to our front end. There are two parts, front end, back end. Front end is for user interaction, right? This front end is what user sees, and back end is where our code goes. Now, coming back, this is what we did in our last class, right? We said that initialize global name to empty string. What we are doing here really is reserving a block in the memory, right? And we are calling that block name, right? And we are saying, don't store anything, just reserve an empty block in that memory, which is going to later store some string data. Now, what is string? String is a combination of different characters, right? A, B, C is a string. LIZA is a string. Okay, just one character is also a string. Now, I'm assigning a empty string, because later on it's going to contain some text data, right? And a text data meaning string, in simple words. Okay, now let's go and see what we did here. So when BTN start game. Now for you, it could be BTN1 if you haven't changed your button names. So what I'm saying here is when button is clicked, right? So as soon as the button is clicked, do two things, right? I want to set the global name meaning this name, global meaning a space in the memory, a global space in the memory, right? And I'm calling that space name. So global space called name, set the value of that space to what do I want to set it to? Whatever is the text which is stored in the text box. So I'm going, and to get the text from the text box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this player, txt player name, which is in the text box, and I'm going to say txt player name dot text, right? So get the text from this txt player name text box, this text box called txt player name, and assign the text to that block in the memory that we reserved earlier, right? And then I'm going, after doing that, just open this screen. Which screen do you want to open? Screen 2. And I want to pass some data from screen 1 to screen 2. And what is that data? That data is the name, which is the global variable or the global space that I just defined in my memory. But now by global is, I mean something which can be accessible by different screens. Now remember, each screen is on its own, it's individual, right? Meaning screen 2 cannot access a label from screen 1, and screen 1 cannot access a label from screen 2, right? So in order for them to be able to access each other's data, we create a global space in the memory. Anyways, too much talking. Let's go to screen 2. Coming back, let's so in coding, it's very usual practice, or it's a prudent practice, I must say, that we do a pseudocode, right? So we write down the things, or we write down like bulleted points, or like via diagrams or something that our code we want our code to do. So let's think about what all things do we want our code to do in this particular game. And I highly, highly recommend everybody to please do the pseudocode before starting to code. So what do you want to do? What want your code to do? You can do it per screen, or you can do it overall. So in screen 1, I do this, this, this. In screen 2, I do this, I do this, 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 and so on. Anyways, so I'm going to share whiteboard. Hopefully everybody is able to see my whiteboard. Okay, now I want my code to do a few things, right? First thing that I want my code to do is to move the pirate with the finger, right? As soon as I click my finger on the pirate, so I want my code to do a few things. First is to move the pirate in the direction of my finger, right? So if I move my finger to the left, I want my code to I want my pirate to move to the left. If I move my finger to the right, I want the pirate to move to the right. Simple. So I wrote it down here. Let me see if I can use a pen. Markup. Okay. So this is the first thing that I want my code to do. Oops. So I want to move the pirate in the direction of the finger, and I want to bounce when the edge is reached. So as soon as the edge is reached, as soon as the pirate touches the edge, so like I did this, so it touches the edge. Now I want it to bounce back. I don't want it to go behind the screen, right? Because then it will become invisible. So I want it to bounce back just a little bit as soon as the edge is reached. So two things, right? Move the pirate in the direction, move the pirate in the direction of the finger, okay? And second is to use a different color here. Okay, bounce when the edge is reached, right? So move the pirate, bounce when the edge is reached. Let's do the first part first. But before that, let's understand what other functionalities do we want. We also want to move the enemies, right? So remember how we talked about, I want to change the position of my enemies to a different position after every 2 seconds, right? So enemy 1, say initially is here. After 2 seconds, I want it to go here. Enemy 2, say initially is here. After 2 seconds, I want it to come here. So I want to change the position of my enemies to a random position after every 2 seconds, right? So that's one thing. What other things do we want? Look at our vice here. We also want to see what happens if they collide. What happens if the pirate and the enemy collides, right? Because that's our goal, right? To kill all the enemies via collisions, right? So our goal, the enemy dies when the pirate collides with the enemy, meaning every single time the pirate and the enemy is colliding, I want the enemy to be invisible, right? So how do I do that? So in the collision, if the pirate collided with the enemy, then make the enemy invisible, right? If the pirate has collided with the enemy, make it invisible. And what is the winning condition? If all the enemies are invisible, meaning all of them are dead, then move to screen 3, which is going to tell you, oh, you won or you lost. And the reset button will actually reset the game, meaning it will start the game over, meaning all the dead enemies just come back, meaning all the enemies should be visible, right? So now we have our shooter code set up. I exactly know what exactly I want my code to do. I want to move the enemies. I want to move the pirate. I want to check for the collisions. I want to check for the winning, and I want to be able to reset the game. So 5 things, right? Now let's quickly go over our first card, which is to be able to move the pirate and bounce when the edge is reached. Now go to the blocks quickly and click the pirate, right? Now I love MIT App Inventor because we can code in the language we speak, right? So what I exactly want to do is I want to fling the pirate, right? I want to fling the pirate. Excuse me, share my screen here. It's visible. Okay, so I want to fling the pirate as soon as with my finger, right? So how do I do that, right? So I'm going to use a fling property here. It's called the pirate.flung. And the reason why I use this property, let me go back to the pirate.flung again. Then the reason why I use this property is it has a lot of variables, right? It has x, meaning movement, horizontal, y moving the y position, meaning the vertical position, the speed, what is the speed that I want the parrot to move in, right? The heading, right? So heading is not the heading, but it's the direction in which I want the parrot to head. It's a direction, and x level and y level, meaning what is the horizontal, like the horizontal level and the vertical level of the parent. Now, we don't have to deal with that, so let's not get into that. Our goal is to literally deal with this element, which is called heading, right? So every single time we want to fling the pirate, so when pirate.flung, what we want to do is we want to set, so we want to set the pirate, oops, not this. So we go to the pirate and we want to set the pirate dot heading, right? I'm going to take this and oops, attach it here. I want to set the pirate dot heading to get heading. Let me explain you what I actually did here. So every single time the pirate is flinged, right? I want to head the pirate to the direction of my finger. So get heading will actually get the direction of my finger, right? And set pirate to the heading, which will set the pirate, pirate to that direction, or head the pirate to that direction. So get the direction of my finger and take the pirate and head it to that direction, right? So that's what we are doing here. So every single time the pirate, we are trying to fling the pirate, we want to get the heading, the direction of my finger, and move the pirate in that direction. Right. Now, let's go back to our pseudocode. Now, the second thing that we wanted to check so now let me use a character here. So this is done, right? This is done. We are able to move the pirate. Now, oops, we are able. Okay, sorry, I think. Okay. So this right here is done. We are able to move the pirate in the direction of our finger. Now, next is to bounce when the edge is reached, right? So how do I bounce when the edge is reached? Now, again, we love MIT App Inventor because we code as we speak. So there's literally a function called edge reached. So I'm just going to drag it. So when the pirate's edge is reached, what do I want it? Let me. Okay. When the pirate's edge is reached, what do I want to do? I want to bounce back. I want to bounce back. So I'm going to use a function called pirate. Go to the pirate. And again, we code as we speak. There is a function called pirate.bounce, right? So I'm going to call pirate.bounce and I'm going to set the direction. So which direction do I want to bounce into? Do I want to bounce north, south, east, west? So I can set a direction, or I can, instead of setting it in a direction, I could just move it a little bit backwards. I don't want it to go to a certain direction because then it will decrease the chances of randomness. I'll just move it a little bit backwards. So every single time the edge is reached, just move a little bit backwards. So get the edge and move a little bit backwards, right? Or bounce a little bit backwards. All right. So our second task, which was to first be able to move the pirate with the direction of our fingers. Second, to be able to bounce when the edge is reached. The first point is covered. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to because I don't want to share. Oops, let me see if I can share two windows at a time. Okay, so now my second task is also done, which is to bounce when the edge is reached. Now, my third task, right? My second point is to move the enemies. Now, how do I move the enemies? Let's quickly go back to our App Inventor window. There it is. Now, I like to keep each point at a distance in the same column so that I know this is all the things related to the pirate, and then I'm going to make a second column for the enemies. So everything which is related to the enemies will be the second column, and then the button reset can be the third column. Okay, so now we want to move the enemies at a random position every single time the edge is reached. Oh, sorry, the timer goes off, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the clock, right? Because we are dealing with a timer. Now remember, we select the component which we want to act as the trigger, right? Here, the trigger was the interaction with the pirates. That is why we used the functions from the pirate sprite. Next, we want the trigger to occur when the interaction happens with the clock, meaning every single time the clock turns off, goes off, I have to move my enemies. So I'm going to select clock. I'm going to say clock.timer. When, again, as we speak, the same V code. So when timer goes off, right, you need to do something, right? What do you need to do? By the way, I forgot to mention this. how do you set the timer? Meaning, how do you set the interval? Is it 2 seconds? Is it 1 second? So go to the designer, click on the clock, and in the property, you will see the time interval. Now, every 1,000 represents 1 second, right? So 1,000 meaning 1 second. If I put it to 2,000, now it is a 2,000 2 seconds. So every single time the 2 second goes up, do something. So coming back to the block, what do I want to do? Well, I want to move the enemies to a random position. So because I want to move the enemies, I'm going to select the enemy, right? So, and I'm going to do the same thing for all 4 enemies. So we can literally copy paste that. But let's understand how to do it for one, and then we can copy paste for the rest. So click the enemy, right? And there is a property, again, we code as we speak. So there's a property called enemy.move2, right? And move, I can use move to point, move or point in direction. Again, what is doing? It's move to point, meaning it's going to move the enemy sprite to a point, right? And then I give a x coordinate and y coordinate. X coordinate is the horizontal direction, and the y coordinate is the vertical direction. And move to x, y is it just takes 2 different values, x, two values separately, so x separately and y separately. So let's use a simpler one, so move 2. So I'm just going to use this element here. So every single time the timer goes off, move the enemy 1, 2. Where do I want to move it to? I want to move it to a random position, right? So now how do I select a random position? To do that, I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to generate a random number, right, in a certain range, and I'm going to use that random number to move my enemy, to move the enemy to that random number position, right? So if I say x phi, y phi, right, and then I move my enemy x phi and then y phi. That's one way to do it. However, we don't want that random position to be outside the canvas. Right now, remember, we put our enemies and our pirate in a canvas here, which is like a playground in which they can move. I don't want them to leave the playground, right? So I'll make sure to generate a random number, which is less than the height of the canvas and less than the width of the canvas, or equal to the width of the canvas, because I don't want it to be more than the height or the width of the canvas, right? So I cannot have, if the canvas is until here, I cannot go here, right? And if the canvas ends here, my enemy cannot go here, right? It should stop at this edge. It cannot go here, right? So I'm going to say, now the way to generate the random number is to, here there's a math function, right? Every function which is related to math, addition, subtraction, numbers generation, numbers, anything is going to, you're going to find that function in the math library here. So I'm going to use that library, and I'm going to use this function random integer from, right? So I'm going to take this, right, random integer from, and attach it. So move the x to a random integer from 1 to 100. That's the default, but we don't want it to be 1 to 100, right? We want it to be 0, right? So you can go from 0, but the maximum value, remember, the maximum value you can have is the width of my canvas, right? So I'm going to take the canvas, and I'm going to get the width of the canvas. So canvas dot width. Yeah, as we say, the same we code. So I'm going to remove this. So just click on this to remove the 100. Just delete that, right? And I'm going to attach that here, right? So it's automatically going to remove, and then I can press the delete key to delete. Or you can just right click and delete 3 blocks or whatever. So it will delete, but I'm not going to do that. But that will delete the 3 blocks. Be mindful what exactly selected. You can select or unselect a component by clicking on it or clicking off it. So, okay. Now, the important part is now the y part. So I can do the exact same thing for y, right? So Control C, and Control V, or you can use Command if it's a MacBook. So Command C, Command V, and then instead of width, I want to say height, right? So remember, X is the horizontal position. So don't go from, you can start from 0, right? Which is the leftmost width of the canvas, but you cannot go more than the width. So I restrict the random number generation at the width, right? And Y is the horizontal component, meaning you can start at the 0, but you cannot go more than the height. If the height is like here, I cannot go here, right? So again, this is what I use to generate a random integer within the canvas. Okay, shoot me with any questions if you have any. Now, again, Control C, Control V. Let me show this again. Delete. Click on this element, press Control C and Control V. You can literally replicate that for all the 4 enemies. So Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, and then this is enemy. Oops, this is enemy 1, this is enemy 2, and this is enemy 3, right? So this will enable me to move all the enemies to a random XY position every single time the timer goes off. Great. Now we are able to move the pirate with our finger. We are able to bounce the pirate back every single time the edge is reached. And third, we are able to move the enemies to the random positions. Now, next step was to detect the collisions, right? How do we detect the collisions? Well, we want to check we want to do something every single time the pirate collided with the enemy, right? So let me minimize this, but you can still see the code here. Now, every single time the pirate has, I'm going to use a different row here because it's for collisions, a different task. So, sorry, the column. And every single time the pirate collides with the enemy, do something, right? So again, the pirate is the trigger point. So you click on pirate, and there is, again, as we speak, the same V code. Pirate collided with. So when the pirate is collided with, you got to do something. And what is that something that you want to do? You want to make the enemy invisible, right? So here, in order to check if the pirate has collided with an enemy and not something else, let's first check that if did the pirate collide with the enemy, or was it just the edge of the screen, right? Now, how do I check that? So I'm going to use a if-else block, like, right? So if the collision was with enemy, then make the enemy visible, right? So I'm going to, in order to use a if-else, meaning a conditional block, there is a section called control, right? Now, control is mostly for conditional statements, right? If this happened, then do this. If that happens, then do that, right? So, for example, if you want to say, okay, if it rains today, then get an umbrella. However, if it doesn't rain today, then don't get an umbrella. So it's a control or the conditional statement that you're making, which is dependent on something else. Anyways, so you take the if then, attach it here, right? So if something happens, then do this. Now, what is that something? If the pirate is colliding with the enemy, right? So as we speak, the same V code. So click on pirate, and there is, again, a method called pirate.colliding with, right? So attach it here. If the pirate is colliding with, now with who? Let's check for enemy first, right? So if the pirate is colliding with the enemy, so I'm just going to take, oops. Okay, so if the pirate is colliding with the enemy, I don't know why do we keep doing that, okay. So if the pirate is colliding with the enemy, right, then do something. What do I want to do? I wanna make the enemy invisible. how do I do that, right? So again, what do I want to make invisible? Enemy, right? So I am going to go to the enemy. Let me change this to enemy first. So enemy, and then going to choose a property called visible. So go here and look for enemy.visible, right? So enemy.visible. Oops, don't use this because this is, so understand how this works. When I say enemy.visible, it's going to give me the value of the enemy if it was visible or not visible, right? However, if I'm going to use set enemy.visible, so say this one here, set enemy.visible, this is going to set the visibility of enemy to something, right? So enemy.visible will just make the enemy is visible or invisible, right? However, set enemy.visible will set the value of enemy to visible and non-visible or invisible. Now, for visible, we say true, and for invisible, we say false, right? So again, as we speak, as we code. So we go to our logic section here, and there are two things, true or false. If you want to make it visible, you set it to true. If you want to make it to invisible, you set it to false. Okay, so now this is done, right? So every single time you want the pirate has that goes through a collision, check if that collision was with the enemy, right? Every single time the pirate collides with something, check if that something was an enemy. If it was an enemy, then set that enemy to invisible, right? That's what we did here. Now again, as we did for the timer, Control C or Command C, Control V. And then you can just do that for every enemy. I have 4 enemies, so enemy, and then don't forget, you gotta change it here, enemy 2, and here, enemy 2, right? Again, here I'm going to change it to enemy 3, enemy 4, oh, enemy 1, actually, got enemy 1, and then enemy 1. The order doesn't matter, but just remember that if you are checking the collision with enemy 1, then you have to set enemy 1 to invisible, right? Let me see if I did this correctly. Yeah, okay. So now the collision system. Great, awesome. So we accomplished a lot of things here. Let's go over it, right? We are able to move the pirate with our finger. We're able to bounce back when the edge is reached a little bit, right? Every single time the timer goes off, we want the enemies to move to a random position. And every single time the pirate collides with something, we check if the collision was with, if that thing was enemy. And if it was, then we set that enemy to that collision enemy to invisible. All right. Now, let's talk about our button, right? So every single time the reset button is clicked, we want to start the game over, right? So I'm going to click that. I'm going to say this, right? So bdn reset dot click. So same as what we did in screen 1, right? When start game was clicked, we were doing something. In screen 2, we are saying that every single time the button is clicked, do something. Now, what is that something? We want to make all the enemies come back, right? We want all the enemies to be visible, right? How do we do that? Well, we say set enemy 1. So again, remember, to set the position of the enemy to visible, we use set enemy.visible, right? So we literally copy control. So to copy 2 elements, just click on it and click on the second element. But when I click on the set enemy.visible here, it is connected to false. So the next element that thing is connected to is going to come with it when you copy it. So I'm just going to select this, Control C, Control V, and then just set it here. and then visible to true instead of false, right? And then to C, Control V, I just set it C, Control V, or C, Control V. So I want enemy 1 to be visible, enemy 2 to be visible, and enemy 3 to be visible, and enemy 2. So I want all 4 enemies to come back, right? So great, we are able to accomplish all our functions that we wrote down in our pseudocode, right? However, there is one thing which is missing. What was that one thing? Well, we forgot about the winning condition, right? What happens if all the enemies are if we win, right? How do we know that we have won or the pirate has won, right? So if all the enemies are invisible, meaning we have conquered the playground and we have defied the odds and we have won, right? So in order to check that we have won, what we are essentially checking for is, are all the enemies invisible? If they are, then meaning we have won, right? Now, what is the trigger? When do we check it, right? We don't have a button which will be clicked to check if I have won. We don't want to give a button to the user to keep pressing to check if I won, right? So what is a trigger? So in this case, we don't have a trigger, right? However, we have a clock. We can trigger something every single time this timer goes off. The 2-second goes off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the winning condition here, right? So every single time the timer goes off, first check if all the enemies are already invisible, right? If they're already invisible, then just move to the second screen 3 and declare the winning. But if they're not already visible, if they're not all invisible, then move them to a different position, right? So how do I check that? I'm going to use this clock as a trigger, right? And I'm going to say, right? So again, I have to check if something is true, then do that. And what is that something? If all the enemies are invisible, then move to second screen 3 and declare the winning, right? So again, go to the logic, the control, and use the if and. I'm going to attach it here before moving the enemies to a random position. Why? Because they're all invisible. There's no point moving them to a random position, right? You just want to move to screen 3 and declare the winning, right? So now, if enemy 1, so I'm going to say enemy, right? Go to the enemy spring, and then I want to check multiple conditions, right? So if enemy 1 is invisible and enemy 2 is invisible and enemy 3 is invisible and enemy is invisible, only then you have won, right? What if only 2 enemies are invisible and 2 are still visible? Then the game is not over yet, right? But if all the enemies are invisible, only then we can say that the game is over and you have won, right? So keep in mind that we are doing multiple condition and we are using an and, right? So and meaning all the conditions has to be true for the result to be true, right? So I'm going to use an and. Now, how do I get the and? Go to the logic, and there is a button called and, right? So I'm just going to click this, right? Now, how many conditions do I have? Enemy 1 visible. How many conditions do I have to check for? So I have to check for if enemy 1 is invisible, enemy 2 is invisible, enemy 3 is invisible, and enemy 4 is invisible, right? So in order to check for that, I'm going to use and I'm going to attach 4 conditions. So in order to change the number of conditions, just click on the settings tab. This is an iterator, right? And click on the Boolean. Boolean meaning anything which can have 2 values, true and false, right? So it can be either true or it can be either false. So if enemy can be either visible, meaning true, and enemy can be either invisible, meaning the visibility is false, right? So I'm going to take the Boolean, right? And I'm going to and it, whoops. And I'm going to add it to here, right? So when I add this Boolean to here, so now you can see there are 3 conditions now. We want 4 and 4 conditions for 4 enemies. So now there are 4 conditions. Okay, so now I have these conditions. Now, once I have these conditions, I can say, go here and you go to the enemy and check for the visibility, right? So now we'll use enemy.visible, right? So where is enemy.visible, right? So this will tell me what is the visibility of an enemy. Is it true, meaning visible, or false, meaning invisible, right? And then I'm going to just do the same, or you can either do copy paste, C, Control V, and then Control C, Control V, and then Control C, Control V. Let me move this a little to the right. You can have it can overlap. There's not going to be a problem, but it cannot be connected with this. However, I like to keep it a little sweet, so I'm just going to move it that side. So now I have 4 conditions here. Enemy1.visible, enemy2.visible, check for the enemy2's visibility, enemy3's visibility, and enemy1's visibility. Right, so now I'm checking for the visibility of all four of my enemies. Now, if they all 4 are invisible, right? So now this is just checking, but I have to check if the check came out to be invisible. Now, how do I check that? In order to do that, I have to use the operator called equals to, right? So I'm going to attach an equals to operator. So let me remove this here. I'm going to attach an equals to operator. So if the enemy one's visibility came out to be false, right? Meaning it was invisible, then do something, right? So it shouldn't be, let me take this off. About this. So I am checking if the enemy's visibility came out to be false, meaning it was invisible, then you got to do something, right? So I want to check, and I'm going to check this for every enemy. So let me attach it here. Control C, Control V. And again, I'm able to copy the whole, the whole block, and I'm bring this here, move this block here, that block a little bit here. Maybe I can Control C, Control C, Control V, and there we go. All right, so now we have our enemies visibility checked. So if the visibility of enemy 1, enemy 2, and enemy 3, if the visibility of all of these came out to be false, meaning we have 1. Now, what do I want to do when I have 1? I want to say move to screen 3. Now, remember, how do we move to screen 3? Go to Control, and it says open another screen, right? So just click that and attach it, and I have to open another screen, right? Now, I want to greet the user, say, I want to say, oh, no mind. Let's just do open another screen, and we're not passing any data this time. So let's just say open another screen and screen 3. So every single time the winning conditions are true, right? I want to move to screen 3, meaning if I won, go to screen 3, which is a winning screen, means the game has finished. All right. So at this point, I would recommend you to go and run your app and see if you're able to go to screen 3, but make sure you have a screen 3 created, right? In the designer. Now, my screen 3 looks just like this. I'm going to just have a label, right? And I'm going to change the text of this label to you have won, right? And then maybe I wanna say that I want to change the color to yellow. If no, right. Maybe I want to change the background color to yellow. Sorry, I have a bad sense of color. No mind. Don't know what's going on here. Let me click on screen 3 and change the background color for the whole screen. Okay, that's better. Okay, so every single time we win, I want to come to the screen and say, oh, you won, right? So that's all, right? And then go to the blocks. You don't want to code anything, so blocks could be just empty for the screen. And that's our game. I hope you enjoyed this and it was able to make some sense. And then I'm going to be attaching a second video in which I'll show you some simple tools like adding music to your app, because I know Reed is doing something with music, or how to add drop down. So, how to add a drop down list. I know Luca is doing something, or how to replace the text of the button. I know Drew is doing something with that. So I'm going to be walking you over through some simple tools or how to use them or how to code them. It's going to be a very short video, the next one. So feel free to watch it or like skip it to the section that you want or you find relevant in your app. And hope you enjoyed this. Go ahead and test your app and send me a recording, send me a screen recording of your app, and see you Saturday. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for watching.